Well, here's a few news articles. This one I thought was very interesting. This is a different kind of windmill without any rotating blades. The whole thing just vibrates like that. And this is apparently, of course, a lot more attractive. It's not going to hurt birds. It's not going to probably make a lot of noise and be dangerous. And generally, the big ones need a lot of land and stuff. They said they could just stick this on top of a utility pole or a home, and apparently it makes a considerable amount of energy. So it's a new idea I've never seen, but that seems like it might be a way to bring, they say it would be, might be cheaper and easier than even putting up solar panels. So that might be a step forward in renewable energy. The big scandal about AstraZeneca, a bunch of European nations have refused to use it. It's not been approved yet in the United States, but it all seems completely fake. I mean, a few people got blood shots after taking it, but it was the same number of people in the general population that would have gotten blood clots. There's no evidence at all that it caused any of the blood clots, and all these European nations panicked and blocked it. So now they're trying to say it's okay, but after all this scandal, people don't want to take it, of course. They've just seen scary news reports that something's wrong with it. It's pretty awful, because I think AstraZeneca was one of the ones that was really going to save a lot of people in the world. As I remember, this one was like cheaper to make and easier to store and likely to be distributed all around the world, so it's a shame if, for no good reason, a bunch of people are scared of it. That seems to be where we've ended up. This one sounds awesome. When you slide your key into the lock to unlock it, it makes some noise, and your smartphone can listen carefully to that noise and deduce the shape of the key. So you can pick a lock by measuring the sound made when the key goes into it. You can figure out how to make an identical key, which is bloody awesome. Reminds me of a story from UC Berkeley a few years back, where if you have the microphone on like I do right now, and you type your password, they can take the sound of your fingers on the keyboard and deduce some information about your password. The same kind of thing. So that sounds like a real fun project. There's already another one been out there for a couple of years where if you take a picture of a key, like if you even just take a picture of a person standing there with like a key ring hanging from their belt, and you get a picture of the key, that can be enough to duplicate the key because modern smartphones and cameras have such high resolution. This is amazing, and I highly recommend the podcast with Bill Nye about this that I heard. I heard a little bit about this a while ago, but this is much more informative. The sperm count of humans worldwide has dropped 60% in the last 50 years. It's dropping by 1% per year. It is amazing. It is dropping so fast that they are getting concerned about the long-term viability of the human race. If it drops much further, it will be hard to come back. And when I in the 60s, we worried about overpopulation, but this is all happening because of stuff in plastics. If you know the organic food kind of people will tell you to get this special plastics or use non-plastic containers like glass or something. Apparently that is really true, but it's not only the containers, it's the tubes they use in the factories where they fill things like soap and stuff, and they're putting these dangerous chemicals directly in products like hand lotion and shampoo. And in America, if you have a new chemical that you just want to put in a consumer product, he said you can just put it in without doing safety tests first. The safety tests only come later when people complain, and then you have to prove there's something wrong with it. In Europe, they recently changed that. So there are thousands of chemicals added to American products that are banned in Europe. And anyway, those making them test products before putting them in chemicals that people put into their bodies would be a good idea, but the damage has already been done because the main consequence of consuming these chemicals is if they get into a man before he impregnates a woman, or if they get into a woman during the first trimester of pregnancy. And if they do, the male children are born with underdeveloped sexuality that affects many parts of their body, in particular the reproductive system, but also things like the heart and the brain. They all fail to get a sufficient amount of male hormones early, and they don't develop properly. And it has the result of a lowered sperm count and causing more diseases and stuff. So it is amazing stuff. And it's very interesting. And so anyway, a really important scientific finding with probably very large consequences, and I was very interested to learn about it. If I was about to have a child, which I'm not, I would actually be very concerned about this. I would probably want to somehow get this junk out of my body before fathering a child. And if I was a woman considering having a child, I would have the same concern. Somehow, how do you go on a detox to get this junk out of you so you do not poison your child? Anyway, because apparently it's all over the world. These chemicals are used commonly in plastics, and they get everywhere, and they measure it in everybody's bodies all over the world. So you'd have to do something kind of extreme, like live on an extreme organic diet for a while or something to clean it out, I guess. Anyway, a lot of people, these NFTs are the new hot thing. They take a digital product like an image or a video, and they make it into a collectible. And the point is you're just buying a certificate that you are the official owner of something, which might have some value like a trading card or something, but it turns out that they are incredibly poorly administered. A bunch of people are making NFTs when they don't even own the original art. So and then the actual NFTs, when you look into the technology of them, they are incredibly bad. What you actually have on the blockchain, early by 1 hour today? No, I don't think so. Oh, if you're from a foreign country, you might think so. We have daylight savings time in America. So our clocks all changed on Sunday to jump forward by an hour. So everything in America is on a different time zone now. So yes, it is an hour earlier than it was last week. But it's at the same clock time as clocks work in America. Anyway, so you have what's actually on the blockchain, however, is not a unique identifier of the artwork at all. I just assumed that what you'd put on the blockchain would be something like a SHA-512 hash of the artwork. So it would be a unique identifier of the artwork, but what they're putting there is just a URL to some company's website which contains information about the art. And the point is you're supposed to be buying a permanent thing. The whole point of the blockchain was to duplicate gold, essentially. You were supposed to have a object that you could have like a Bitcoin, and it would be forever. It would not be dependent on any government or any company or anything. It would be recorded on this immutable thing. But when what you record on the immutable thing is just a URL going to a website run by a company, then when that company goes broke, or if that company decides to swindle you by changing what's at that URL, your token no longer means what it should. So this is really fantastically poorly designed. And people are paying up to $66 million for these things. And what they're getting is something that is designed so badly that it does not even deliver the apparent value it should, which is nice, immutable proof that you own this thing. Yes, well, yeah, digital currency, because you can't reverse the charges, that is certainly a property of digital currency, but that's by design, and it's the same thing with gold. The whole point of digital currency was to reproduce gold, and of course, if you have gold coin and you give it to somebody, it's gone. That was what they wanted. They wanted it to be free from government supervision and government control, so that means you can't reverse the charges. Now, if you use Visa or MasterCard, you can totally reverse the charges. You can complain to Visa or MasterCard, and if they don't satisfy you, you can sue them and go to court. And the American justice system is there, and you have the Federal Reserve and the banking regulations and everything. All this bureaucracy is there around other kinds of money, which I highly recommend because I used to be working at an escrow agency and had a bit to do with finance. I came to respect the U.S. System. But the whole point of digital currency was for people who are sort of libertarians and say there should be no government supervising anything. I want to be like on a desert island just bartering like my pig for your cow or something and have no government anywhere in the transaction. And if you're going to do that, then if I rip it off, steal it, or trick you out of it, there's nothing you can do about it. And that's what happens. And almost everything to do with cryptocurrency or the blockchain is scams. Scams are rampant. Manipulated markets, pump and dump schemes, just constantly, and there is no recourse. If you go to like a U.S. court and say somebody stole my Bitcoin, I don't think they can do anything about it, really. Whereas if you go there and say somebody stole the money out of my American bank account, they can do something about it. That's why I highly recommend that people use normal real money and not this cryptocurrency. It is much, much less safe. But of course, it's been going up and up for some reason which I cannot understand. So people that have bought some and held it have made a lot of money, apparently. I'm just constantly nervous about the fact that it's not underpinned by anything that makes any sense. But they say I'm this old fuddy-duddy and that doesn't matter anymore, and maybe not. Anyway, so we are in quite a race in America. We've now got the vaccine rolling out. Some of my friends have now started getting their vaccines. I've got my first shot and my next shot on Monday. But it's a race now because a lot of states are opening up, banning all restrictions. People are just pretending there's no virus and going back to normal life, even though they have not been vaccinated. So it is already spreading, and the rate of cases is going up, and therefore the rate of mutations is going up. So we will see if we can get enough people vaccinated fast enough before it mutates into a newer, more nasty form and infects people. It would be a whole lot better from a viewpoint of public health if everybody would just continue to have universal mask mandates and do social distancing for a while. Yeah, Putin wants to give Biden a dose of Sputnik. Well, he might. I understand Sputnik is actually pretty good. Although Putin put it out in a terrifying way by just skipping phase 2 and 3 clinical trials, from what I understand, Sputnik actually works pretty well. The one that doesn't work very well is the Chinese one, the Suto or something, Simo or something like that. The Chinese one is less effective. But anyway, they all beat the hell out of getting COVID. Man, my friend just got their shot and said, my arm is sore for a couple of days. And I said, yeah, so was mine, but it beats COVID. COVID is scarier all the time. There's all these COVID long haulers that are sick for like almost a year. They just stay sick and they have like what seems to be long-term lung damage and brain damage. And it's no fun at all. So I'd highly recommend that everybody take the vaccine. If I could get that AstraZeneca, I would get it. I mean, all these vaccines are a whole lot better than COVID. Anyway, here we are at 129S. So I'm going to do what I was going to do last week. It looks like the stream is working better this week. I've got an alternative internet I can use if I have to, but I think we're under good enough control. And just as I say that, I see a pause up there. Oops. And right there, I see a really bad delay up here. I shouldn't have said that. All right, let me try adjusting. Okay, I just saw the delay turn up really high again. I found an adjustment inside this UBS thing that lets me change the bandwidth. And I took it down a little bit, and I'm going to take it down a little more. I know it froze. I could see it from here. See, I can tell from this ping. And when it's bad, the ping gets over a second. And I tested it a couple hours ago, and it was fine. Now it looks like it's bad again. But you seem to get quite a bit better when I lowered the bandwidth inside these settings. So if I go to the video, output. Yeah, output. I can change the bit rate. Let's try 2000 and see how that is. Because really, mostly what I'm showing you is static slides. You don't really have to update them very fast. I'm not playing videos or anything. So we'll see if this works better. And please put in the chat if it starts freezing up, because I may not notice. Anyway, let me close some of these extra windows. That we're going to need. And that we're going to need. All right. I'm just trying to clean up my situation here so I know what's happening. All right. Well, we'll carry on as best we can. I think I don't really need all this bandwidth, and I can watch the delay here with my pings and detect when it's happening anyway. And I did order some extenders to get my landlord's Wi-Fi extended down here, so that'll be another option, but I won't be able to set that up for a couple days. Anyway, so we're going to do Chapter 8 and Chapter 9, which I should have all ready to go here. The last of Chapter 8 and the beginning of Chapter 9. All right, so here we go. And we'll carry on. My Comcast is somewhat substandard, but I think I can get the job done. Just checking for delay. Looks like the delay is larger, but not terrible, especially for these slides. When we get to the cahoots, I might stop and restart the stream to try to lower this delay. But anyway, so access control, we talked about. You have to do authentication and session management, so you find out who somebody is and you maintain information about who they are. And then every time they access anything, you have to check to make sure they're authorized to go where they're going. So this would have to be for every request. And of course, a lot of people cut corners and don't really enforce it everywhere, and that's when you have a vulnerability. So you can have vertical or horizontal or context-dependent vulnerabilities where you're able to reach something you really should not be able to access. The most common one people think about is vertical escalation, where you move from a user up to administrator. Horizontal is where you move from a user over to a different user's site, and that's the most common one you see bug bounty reports for on things like Facebook, where they will definitely pay for that if you find a way to get into somebody else's account. That's the kind of thing they totally don't want happening. And so you might be able to do other things aside from getting into some other person's account that you shouldn't be able to do, like skip over the page where you pay for your stuff and just get to ordering a product, which is again something, of course, that they don't want you doing. And one thing that is extremely common is just unprotected functionality. It's in the OWASP top 10. I'm not sure it's got the current name, but the original name was unsecured direct object access, where something is just sitting on the server and anybody that finds that URL can see it, and yet it is something that really is not intended to be visible to the whole world. So that's security through obscurity is another term for it. It's where you put something in an unprotected location, but you imagine that no one will find it. And this is not a good bet. People are quite good at finding things, and if you take the hacking classes, we talk about this. There are tools we talked about here too as well, like Skipfish and Derby in Kali, that will find hidden things on websites by just trying a long list of common names for things until it gets in. So, right, you might see things like this, an admin directory or a secure directory with a funny subdirectory. And you might imagine that nobody's going to find this, but in practice they often do, one way or another. So if you want to find these, you might look in the code and you might find links to them, which would give you a clue. All right. And you can go to common directory lists. Also, Google is, of course, very good at finding these things. This is a fairly common thing, that someone like a teacher will put something up like a list of students that's not really supposed to be public and put it on a web server, but not put a link to it. And then Google will find it because Google Crawler is very good at this and put it on Google. So, anything that isn't public should really not be public. The public should not be able to do this. Yes, that is indirect object reference. It's by OWASP, yeah. This thing here, unsecured direct object access. I'm not sure about IDOR. That might be the new term for it. Let me just take a quick look at that. Insecure direct object reference. Yeah, that sounds like another word for the same thing. Yeah. I think the name did change. It was originally unsecured direct object reference. Now I think it's insecure. All right, good. Anyway, they do change it every couple of years. All right, so you also might have a function, usually it's very common with PHP, that you put something here, which is an identifier which is actually used to construct a file name. And so you might have some document that should only be available for people who paid for it, but the documents are all just publicly available, and all they're paying for is the chance to see the link. So then if one person buys it, they can just give the link to other people and they can all see it, and that sort of thing. And the reason this keeps happening is the same reason why everything in this course happens, because the developer developing this site might not really understand or have access to whatever other part of the site handles the login and authentication. And then they're trying to make this part work without really being easily able to get information from the other site of who you are and whether you're authorized. All right, so you might be able to guess other documents by adding numbers or finding these URLs in logs or elsewhere in the app, so you might be able to reach all these documents that are not really supposed to be available to you. And then, of course, the multi-stage function we've talked about, you can do it with a shopping cart, or it can be something else, like select new user, department role, then enter username and password. In any case, it might only check access control for the first person to make sure you're the administrator that has the right to make a new user, and then not check that you're the administrator over here, so I can just skip up to there. That's the sort of thing that, again, is another form of insecure direct object access. And so let's talk about this. Static files, like a book you pay for, could be like this, where anybody with the URL can download the book, even though that's not really what you intend to do. And another thing you can do is restrict all access to this path. Now that might sound good, but the question is, how did you restrict it? Now, if you restricted it by a cookie, which proves that you really have logged in as the administrator, then that would be pretty good. But often they use something else, like just simple things like user role, HTTP request method, and those things are not measured by something simple, by something secure. One thing you can do is verb tampering. The get is the most common thing, get or post. They might actually only apply access control to the post method. So if you use get, you might be able to perform an administrator level task, or head, or even just random words, not a valid verb. Quite a few web servers will treat any invalid request as just a get. But if they're using configuration rules that are based on the word, like the kind you'll see in Apache configuration rules, it might not apply if you change the verb. So that's verb tampering is what they call that at the Pentester Academy, and I thought that was a pretty good term. So here's other ways to do it, by parameter, referrer, or location. You can just have a parameter somewhere in a cookie or in the URL that determines whether you're allowed to do it, and of course that's ridiculous, because as we've seen, you can easily just change that parameter in burp and give yourself the privilege. You can use the referrer to show that they really came from the previous page, but again, we can modify that. A lot of people like to use the location. And that sounds good, but it's in fact not very good, because there's no good way to really know your location. I might use geolocation on your phone. When you install an app, it will say this should have access to your location, and that would be fine, but then I can still bypass it by going through a web proxy or a VPN, or altering your phone. So your phone thinks it's in another location or reports something else by changing the code. Knowing where somebody is based on a web request is not very secure. And I think everyone knows this if they get around geographical restrictions to see things like sports events. You get used to finding some open VPNs so you can appear to be in another country. So if you want to find these things, Burp has some tools. You can map while logged in as one user, and then map as logged in while another user. This was the ordinary user, this one's the administrator. And then you can see that the administrator sees a couple functions that you don't see, like a couple here, username, that aren't down here, and that would be a pretty good idea. And then if the low privilege user tries to go to one of those pages, they're denied access. This person is able to list user sessions, but if you try, this one is told not authorized. But if you try other administrator functions, you might find one. Here's one where you can list the users, and the low privilege user is allowed to do that because this is, again, unsecured direct object access. This functionality did not test to make sure you had logged in as the administrator. They just assumed that you would reach this functionality by going through these other steps, and they blocked one of the earlier steps, which is the classic mistake here. All right. And so if you want to test these, you can guess other methods and just try sending requests. If you see this one here tells you in one of the responses that this thing is an IBM server, so that would help you guess what the expected names are of things you're going to find on that server. So you walk through it as URL, find all the important, walk through it as logged in as an administrator, and find the high privilege resources, and then go back as a low privilege user to see if you can still access them. All right, and again, find sensitive requests, try other methods, and test them with a low privilege account. So here's the rules. Don't rely on users' ignorance of anything. to protect your stuff. Don't trust anything that came from the user. Don't assume they'll access pages in order. Don't trust them not to tamper with data that you sent them, of course, unless you actually have something like a signed ASP view state, which would be difficult or impossible for them to tamper with. Don't assume they haven't been tampering with it. And so you want to evaluate your document access control for every unit of the application functionality. So the only way to do this in practice without going nuts is to have some kind of central application component. Have some kind of central process on one of your servers where you, and then tell everybody, always check here before you do anything. Always set up something with like an API. Check to see who they are, check to see what role they have or something, and make sure every part of your application always goes to the central thing to check the identity. And it has to be easy and everybody has to know it, because all of this happens because some poor developer is trying to make some functionality and they don't really know how to check to see who you are or whether you're allowed to do something, so they just make it available to everybody. All right, and for very sensitive functionality, you can add two-factor authentication or restrict by IP address or something like that for security critical functions, and you should be logging the high privilege activities, so then you will know. It's extremely common. I think most websites, 75% of them, they get hacked, they never figure it out at all for like 3/4 of a year or longer, and they just get told by an external agency that they've been hacked, and that is outrageous. You should know when you've been hacked. You should put canary tokens on your box, which are just little extra email addresses and URLs that you don't use, but when they get used, you get warned. That means somebody stole your data, log sensitive data, so you notice when unauthorized activities are happening. It really is poor hygiene to get hacked and not even know you've been hacked. All right, and so your central access control has obvious benefits. You can maintain it better, you can upgrade it, you don't have to try to find all these places to upgrade it, you just have one central place where you upgrade and fix the problems that appear. And so for a complex application, you'll have a whole complicated set of things here like search, create application, purge application, and so on, and you'll have a list of roles people might have and who's allowed to do what. And this is just on one central server, just like a domain controller, so you can have a list of what you're allowed to do and who's allowed to do it, and you can have some confidence that that is really happening at your company. Now, there was an obscure PHP vulnerability I made a demonstration of, but I don't think it's very important. And let's just go on to the cahoots. 129S, Chapter 8 is here. All right. Oh, the question about the Unix privilege table. This is at a different level. The Unix privilege table is simple, just replying to like one object and one user. This is much more like an Active Directory setup where you have groups you created. I mean, you could do it on Unix. You have users and groups. I guess you can do it on Unix to some extent. I think of it more in Microsoft terms. But it's just a list of all the groups and all the things they can do. Reaching across more than just one server, typically. All right, well, this may be everyone that's coming. Let's do it. Oh, wait, let me stop this. I said I was going to check it. Stop it, I say. All right. Let me check. Yeah, I think the delay is too bad. I'm going to freeze the stream and restart it to try to get a shorter delay.